Hello, I'm Scott and I'm part of the development team at AuraQ. Welcome to this Mendix tutorial where we'll be looking at the domain model. In these tutorials, we're going to be walking through the basics of low-code application design using Mendix. This video is part of a Mendix Fundamental YouTube series, which covers the essential features required to build an effective application. These topics include the domain model, pages, security, and microflows. For this series, we're going to be building an event planning application for trail walking events, and it's recommended that you have some understanding of data modeling. Lots of learning material can be found on this on the Mendix Academy. So let's get started on building a domain model. So now that you've got your app created and you've given it a name, when you open it, you'll find under My First Module, the domain model, which will start off as blank. And the domain model is what shows you the information that's been used in the application and how it's been structured. And this basically represents tables and relationships that are going to be stored in the database. The database that we use is by default set as the Mendix built-in database, but if required, there are a range of options that can be used. And for now, we'll stick to the built-in database. You'll also notice that there's a domain model per module. So for example, if we open up the marketplace modules, under administration, it'll have a separate domain model. And this helps keep the domain models tidy, also makes them more maintainable and more reusable in other applications. Now we can start making some entities, and you can do this either by clicking on the top bar or dragging in from the side. And the first entity we're going to create is for a root. And the best practice for this is to name them singular instead of plural. So we're going to keep it as root. And some of the options that we'll go through. For generalization, this is used where you want to select a parent entity where you'll inherit all of the attributes. We'll cover that later on. The next option is persistable, and this defines whether the information is stored in the database or whether it's removed after the session. So we'll leave that as persistable for now. An example of a non-persistable entity is one where you might make a calculation or a metric for a chart or analytics, but we want to save this in the database, so we'll leave that as yes. And now we'll just start creating some attributes in this entity. So the first one is name, and similarly we have some guidelines around naming the attributes. We want it in camel case, so that means that the first letter of each word is capitalized. And you also want to keep them short, simple, and related to their real world attribute. We can add some documentation, and then we select the type. So for this one, we're going to leave it a string, and this is the data type. So this will also control what type of inputs you have for the attribute. So for example, a Boolean would have a yes or no as a checkbox or a radio selection, whereas this is a string, so you'd have a text box. You can select the length of the characters, and then also whether the value is stored or calculated. Calculated will run a microflow each time that the entity is retrieved. This will calculate the value based on other attributes and variables, or it's stored, which will be the user input or stored via user action. So now we'll add some more attributes. And this is a string. Distance is an integer, and we also want to note that it's in kilometers. And for difficulty, we want to create an enumeration, which is a list of options. So we'll create a new enumeration and we'll call it enum as a prefix and difficulty. So this will create a new enumeration and we can add the values in here. And the last one, average completion time. And it's going to auto-detect it as a date and time, but we'll change it back to an integer. And that will be in minutes. Some of the other options on the entity include the validation. And for this, it'll be simple validation rules that are applied throughout the application. For example, for the name, we want it to be required, and we can have an error message that will state this is a required field. You can have more complex validation that can be done using microflows. but for now we'll keep it simple. And lastly, we'll look at the system members, which is the metadata that's saved to each record when they're being created or changed. So we can store the created date or the change date, and you can also store the owner and who changed the record last. And now we're going to skip to having the rest of the entities created. There, now we have all the entities required to build the rest of the app. We have event and participant. And if we open event, we're going to save the system members as the created date and the owner. And we're also going to have a look at an example of a generalization. Generalizations allow for an entity to inherit all of the attributes and associations from a parent entity. In this instance, we'll create a generalization for a participant. However, this is only for demonstration purposes. It is a complex topic and it will be discussed more in a later video. Let's open participant and select generalization. We'll open administration and select account. Now, participant will be inheriting all of the attributes and associations from the administration account, and it is shown by the blue box above the entity. You can also see the full name is now duplicated. To see the parent entity, right click and go to generalization. And now you can see the attributes that are being inherited. Now to return to the previous page, there's a shortcut if you press Ctrl and Tab. Now we're back, we can remove this generalization that was created just to demonstrate the feature. Now we're going to look at the associations between the entities. So to draw an association, you can drag from one entity to the other. And the association is describing the relationship between the two. So by default, there's a many to one relationship. And this is describing that there's multiple or many participants for one event, which is correct in this case. It defaults the name to the owner of the relationship, which is participant. And you can double click to rename, which you would do if you had multiple associations between two entities to keep it clear. And you can also change the multiplicity and the delete behavior of the association. So we have different types of multiplicity. We have a one-to-one, and we also have a many-to-many. And we can also change the delete behavior. So for example, if you wanted to delete an event and you wanted all of the participants to be deleted with that, you could set that here. And we're going to create another association between event and root because we might have multiple events to one root. And here we have an example of what that might look like in the database. So for each record in the entity, we'll have a unique ID, which is generated by the Mendix database. And for each association, there will be an association table, which will match the IDs between the entities. You can also create associations between one entity in the domain model to another module. And this can be really useful when using marketplace modules. And that's it for our domain model. Now we can quickly generate overview pages by right-clicking on an entity and generate the overview page, selecting the entities that you want, and also leaving the navigation layouts as default. And to add the overview page to the navigation, click on here and add a new item. So we're going to navigate to the roots. We're going to select a map icon and show a page to the root overview. And now you can run your app and test it out. Okay, now you can view the app, which will open in a browser. And you can click on navigation to open the routes overview and add a new route. So as you can see, we have text boxes and radio for the enumeration options. Now that we have the foundation for the app built, in the next video we'll be going over pages and how you can build an intuitive user interface for your application. Hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. For more information on AuraQ, please visit our website in the link below.